Good evening. So tonight on the 7th of June, we turn to a piece which was published in March of 1916, on the 15th of that month. The 20th chapter of the Life Divine, Death, Desire, and Incapacity. Sri Aurobindo here will make a philosophic argument that death, desire, and incapacity are instrumental to the building of a divine life on earth as a manifestation of Brahman, given the separation and the apparent division caused by the manifestation of the world through the agency of mind. He begins, as always, with a couple of citations from Vedic or Vedantic sources. In this case, the first is from the oldest of the Upanishads, the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. Brihad, the great Aranyaka. And this is the second section in the first chapter, you might say, of the Upanishad. This is something of a condensed translation. It says, "In the beginning, all was covered by hunger, that is death. That made for itself mind, so that it might attain to possession of self." So, an idea in cosmogony that all this universe was, in a sense, the field of a life that feeds upon itself, and so, while it is life, is also death. Hunger. Life is always hungry. Moving out, questing forward, trying to find something which can turn its state of insufficiency into a state of fullness. And then, this life, which is a process of compromise, I give, I get, and I give, then admits this manifestation of mind so that this life may attain to possession of itself. In other words, become conscious of itself and therefore become master of itself. Before then, it is the instinctive push and shove, the shrinking from, the questing for, which dominates. So very telling, very suggestive, and of course this citation will figure more towards the last half of the chapter than strikes us right in the first few paragraphs. He follows that with a second quotation, this one from the Rig Veda and from a book, the fifth, which is fairly old. This is right there in the ancient times of Vedic visioning. And his English translation says, "This is the power discovered by the mortal that has the multitude of its desires, so that it may sustain all things. It takes the taste of all foods and builds a house for the being." The power that is described here, this is life. This is the force of life, which we find, and it is this life that assumes all these multiplication of forms so as to satisfy the desire of some being, some creature. Everything, of course, satisfying another creature is itself in turn satisfied. This is the circle of life. This is the compromise that we all work with, emerging from the field of ignorance. It must be like this in the beginning. It takes the taste, this life force, of all these foods and builds a house, builds a home for this being. The Sanskrit might literally say in English, the raising up of our home. And so then we come, of course, to his introductory paragraph, which is itself a summary in one paragraph of all that he discussed in the last chapter. And it begins, in our last chapter, we have considered life from the point of view of the material existence and the appearance and working of the vital principle in matter. And we have reasoned from the data which this evolutionary terrestrial existence offers. In other words, this philosophic viewpoint reasons back from our actual experience of life and matter and arrives at these large principles which he enunciated last time. But it is evident that whatever it may appear, and however it may work, under whatsoever conditions, the general principle must be everywhere the same. The principle of life must obtain, in a sense it's like a cosmological principle. Through all the chain of being, what he said about it last time must be true. The relationship of mind and life, for instance. The empowerment of all motility in the universe done by prana, by life. And he takes us up more, of course, at the end of this very paragraph. So here he comes to something of a definition. Life is universal force, working so as to create, energize, maintain, and modify, even to the extent of dissolving and reconstructing, substantial forms with mutual play and interchange of an overtly or secretly conscious energy as its fundamental character. So it's working with forms of substance, substantial forms of substance. These are real forms. These are not illusory. These are not merely inconsequential. They have reality behind them. And this force is conscious energy, chit. We'll talk much tonight about Sat Chit Ananda, the real, the conscious, the blissful. So what is conscious force is the actual motivating energy which we experience as life. He continues, in the material world, we inhabit mind. In the material world we inhabit, mind is involved and subconscious in life, just as supermind is involved and subconscious in mind. And this life, instinct with an involved subconscious mind, is again itself involved in matter. So we have this telescoping chain of planes, each connected to the other. In mind, life is involved. In life, mind is involved. In mind, supermind is involved. Supermind being the actual agent of creation, stemming from the infinite Satchit Ananda. It creates this harmonic world, and then through the funnel of mind enters into this triple universe where mind is at the top of what we discover after we have rediscovered that we are alive, after we have been encased, inconscient in matter. Isn't it wonderful? Therefore, matter is here the basis and the apparent beginning. In the language of the Upanishads, Prithvi, the earth principle, is our foundation. Everything starts from matter. In the other Upanishads, it will be called Annam, food. And from that, all begins. The material universe starts from the formal atom surcharged with energy, instinct with the unformed stuff of a subconscious desire, will, intelligence. And this is the force of life. He's taking, of course, writing in 1916, that the idea of the atom being the fundamental structure of the universe is what we would offer as a scientific thesis. Now, of course, we know that there are subatomic particles. Later we'll see what Sri Aurobindo feels about whether matter is infinitely divisible or not, whether we reach a ground of being where stuff is real and irreducible to something else. That is yet to come. But his insight here is that this atom, whatever it is that we describe as the foundation of the material world, has conscious power embedded in it. It is instinct with, as he says, desire, will, intelligence. Out of this matter, apparent life manifests, and it delivers out of itself by means of the living body, the mind it contains imprisoned within it. Mind also has still to deliver out of itself the supermind concealed in its workings. So, some suggestions are embedded in his language here. This tells us that the body is the laboratory of evolution. Out of the living body, the mind it contains imprisoned within it. Mind also has to deliver supermind. The idea that mind is imprisoned in life is suggestive. It connotes that there must be a struggle for freedom from the mechanistic life of matter, the mechanistic existence of matter, so that life can emerge. And then how mind emerges from life is yet another story. How supermind might emerge from mind conveys that this constant working to free an enclosed energy from its casing is always part of the evolutionary story. So we have managed now to manifest mind in a living body. Now we must find that original creative power, the supramental in us, and somehow disclose it. We must do this properly in a continuation of the evolutionary effort, not as something that annuls it or throws us into an extra cosmic state, but we must work it out within the cosmos. And the living body, again, is the laboratory in which we achieve that. So this is how we view it. He continues, but we can conceive a world otherwise constituted in which mind is not involved at the start, but consciously uses its innate energy to create original forms of substance and is not, as here, only subconscious in the beginning. Still, though the working of such a world would be quite different from ours, the intermediate vehicle of operation of that energy would always be life. The thing itself would be the same, even if the process were entirely reversed. So as mind furthers the individuating process begun in the supramental, so that forms can remain apart, in a sense have their own ground of being, just so life always exists within mind, so that it can empower the mind's creations and distribution into these various forms. This relationship between mind and life is always intact, even if you exalted us out of the material world into a supraphysical world. The relationship between mind and life would remain just as he describes it. Life would still be there to give vivified form to what the mind conceives. This is the relationship, whatever the world. But then, it appears immediately that as mind is only a final operation of supermind, so life is only a final operation of the consciousness force, of which real idea is the determinative form and creative agent. So he's digging into this idea a little farther. Consciousness, that is force, is the nature of being. And this conscious being manifested as a creative knowledge will is the real idea or supermind. So again, conscious being, sat being, existence, which is conscious, chit, throws itself forward, leaning through that aspect of consciousness force, becomes knowledge will, which is real in its conceptions. Its ideas have substance. So, Satchidananda, leaning through consciousness force, which apparently has some role in the creativity because it releases itself as the supramental so that manifestation can come into being, multiplication of the one can occur. So we are seeing then a beginning of correspondences among these planes. Let's go a little farther. The supramental knowledge will is consciousness force rendered operative for the creation of forms of united being in an ordered harmony to which we give the name of world or universe. So also, mind and life are the same consciousness force, the same knowledge will, but operating for the maintenance of distinctly individual forms in a sort of demarcation, opposition, and interchange, in which the soul in each form of being works out its own mind and life as if they were separate from the others, though in fact they are never separate, but are the play of the one soul, mind, life, in different forms of its single reality. In other words, as mind is the final individualizing operation of the all-comprehending and all-apprehending supermind, the process by which its consciousness works individualized in each form from the standpoint proper to it, and with the cosmic relations which proceed from that standpoint. So, life is the final operation by which the force of conscious being, acting through the all-possessing and all-creative will of the universal supermind, maintains and energizes, constitutes and reconstitutes individual forms and acts in them as the basis of all the activities of the soul thus embodied. So now we're beginning to get a picture of how this great chain of being unrolls itself. So Satchit Ananda is an infinite oneness. It's creative impulse because it's not static, because it's not just sheer consciousness, passive and latent, but it is a chit shakti, a conscious force, a conscious power. Through that conscious force, as knowledge, as an ordering principle of manifestation, the supermind expresses itself as knowledge will. But also, through that same chit shakti, that consciousness force, the supramental expresses itself as life, as power. Conscious force is that which stands behind the motive power of life. Just as supermind stands behind the power of knowledge expressed through the distribution of mind. So life empowers forms just as mind knows forms when we get down here to ground level where we are. Life empowers forms, mind knows forms. To continue, life is the energy of the divine, continually generating itself in forms as in a dynamo, and not only playing with the outgoing battery of its shocks on surrounding forms of things, but receiving itself the incoming shocks of all life around as they pour in upon and penetrate the form from outside, from the environing universe. So there is a reciprocity of the life force. It gives, it receives, it charges forward, it retreats, it swallows and absorbs, it is swallowed and is absorbed. So in this view, Sri Aurobindo writes, life appears as a form of energy of consciousness, intermediary and appropriate to the action of mind on matter. Mind, life, matter. Life always mediates between these two. In a sense, it may be said to be an energy aspect of mind when it creates and relates itself no longer only to ideas, but to motions of force and to forms of substance. So this distinction of mind and life is more fluid than we might think it to be, and is akin in some ways to the relationship of Satchit Ananda, how they are three in one. Here, of course, given our divided view of things, where we believe separability is true, life and matter appear to be different agencies, and while they may work together, one may be harnessed to the other, they don't seem to be deeply one, and yet they are. But it must immediately be added that just as mind is not a separate entity, but has all supermind behind it, and it is supermind that creates with mind only as its final individualizing operation, so life also is not a separate entity or movement, but has all conscious force behind it in every one of its workings. And it is that conscious force alone which exists and acts in created things. Life is only its final operation, intermediary between mind and body. So what gives force its force? What gives power its power? Chit Shakti. Even though it is not visible to the surface view, its energy is derived from that. It is plugged in to that. All that we say of life must therefore be subject to the qualifications arising from this dependence. We do not really know life, whether in its nature or its process, unless and until we are aware and grow conscious of that conscious force working in it, of which it is only the external aspect and instrumentation. So to say, then, we have no real knowledge about life. We see it in its symptoms. We cannot judge it for what it is. We are seeing, you might say, its tentacular reach, but we are not seeing that from which the tentacles are extended. So there is a greater knowledge than mind possesses trying to examine this process, this power of life. And we cannot have that real knowledge until we exceed the mind, and he suggests here, implicitly, regain that supramental status which is the secret origin of each. Then only, he writes, can we perceive and execute with knowledge, as individual soul forms and mental and bodily instruments of the divine, the will of God in life. Then only can life and mind proceed in paths and movements of an ever-increasing straightness of the truth in ourselves and things by a constant diminishing of the crooked perversions of the ignorance. What is this ignorance? The idea, the notion that we're separate, that there is division, that this self fronts the whole universe. Here I am and there is everything else, when it is absolutely a continuum. There is no real division anywhere. There are distinctions, there is differentiation, there is no division. Execute with knowledge as individual soul forms and mental and bodily instruments of the divine. Here he refers possibly to the idea of a transformed body only being able to grasp and work and execute the knowledge of that vast cosmic secret. Just as mind has to unite itself consciously with the supermind from which it is separated by the action of avidya, ignorance, so life has to become aware of the conscious force which operates in it for ends and with a meaning of which the life in us, because it is absorbed in the mere process of living, as our mind is absorbed in the mere process of mentalizing life and matter, is unconscious in its darkened action, so that it serves them blindly and ignorantly, and not, as it must and will in its liberation and fulfillment, luminously, or with a self-fulfilling knowledge, power, and bliss. Suggesting that to free life, to liberate life, so that it is not darkened and diminished, requires us to regain this unity through conscious evolution. And in India, that in its typical parlance is translated as yoga. Through a greater yoga, a greater conscious evolution, we may be able to release the infinite power which is coiled in matter, which is present in life, and make life capable of divinizing both matter and releasing itself to the full play of knowledge, power, and bliss, which it is meant to bring to earth. In fact, our life, because it is subservient to the darkened and dividing operation of mind, is itself darkened and divided, and undergoes all that subjection to death, limitation, weakness, suffering, ignorant functioning of which the bound and limited creature mind is the parent and cause. So the mind's division from light darkens life's operation. The original source of the perversion, he says, we have seen, the self-limitation of the individual soul bound to self-ignorance, because it regards itself by an exclusive concentration as a separate self-existent individuality, and regards all cosmic action only as it presents itself to its own individual consciousness, knowledge, will, force, enjoyment, and limited being, instead of seeing itself as a conscious form of the One and embracing all consciousness, all knowledge, all will, all force, all enjoyment, and all being as one with its own. So, enclosed, captured by the sense of individuality, we have no more the sense of placement in the cosmic, in the transcendent. Suggesting, in a sense, that this leaning into this extreme aspect of individuality is the source and origin of the cosmic ignorance. Self-ignoring, of course, being the motive power of division, has as its codicil that the individual then is responsible for restoring back to the cosmos the sense of lost unity. We must become the agents, we individuals must become the agents reconstituting felt unity in the world. We must do it in harmony within our own growing society, first in a yogic community, then more broadly across society, and then one with all life on the planet, etc., building harmony upon harmony. This must carry us forwards. To continue with Sri Aurobindo's language, the universal life in us, obeying this direction of the soul imprisoned in mind, itself becomes imprisoned in an individual action. It exists and acts as a separate life with a limited, insufficient capacity, undergoing and not freely embracing the shock and pressure of all the cosmic life around it. So it has limited reciprocity. It's as if it's lost its balance. Out of balance, life follows mind's error with cosmic consequences. Thrown into the constant cosmic interchange of force in the universe, as a poor, limited individual existence, life at first helplessly suffers and obeys the giant interplay with only a mechanical reaction upon all that attacks, devours, enjoys, uses, drives it. But as consciousness develops, as the light of its own being emerges from the inert darkness of the involutionary sleep, the individual existence becomes dimly aware of the power in it and seeks, first nervously and then mentally, to master, use, and enjoy the play. Nervously means when life is absent the obvious drive of mentation before mind manifests. That he's referring to as a nervous life here. But mind awakens in matter, in life, and goes forward. So what he's saying is that this grows in awareness and power as it evolves. And we'll see later what this means for the individual. This awakening to the power in it is the gradual awakening to self. So what he means by this is that the self is real being. So finding the power nascent in us, becoming master of it, is awakening to the actual nature of the self. For life is force, and force is power, and power is will, and will is the working of the master consciousness. So there he's given you a reverse chain of the nature of being, from above down, from above down, from below up. life in the individual becomes more and more aware in its depths that it too is the will force of Satchidananda, which is master of the universe, and it aspires itself to be individually master of its own world, to realize its own power and to master as well as to know its world is therefore the increasing impulse of all individual life. That impulse is an essential feature of the growing self-manifestation of the divine and cosmic existence. A key passage and worth noting. But though life is power, and the growth of individual life means the growth of the individual power, still, the mere fact of its being a divided, individualized life and force prevents it from really becoming master of its world, as long as the individual stands separate and is trying to recover that connectivity, that large, all-embracing experience of oneness. Then it cannot have that kind of mastery which it must seek. It will seek it, but it will be thwarted. So you always see the small trying to take all of its environment into itself, and always failing and having repercussions from an overreach. For that would mean to be master of the all-force, and it is impossible for a divided and individualized consciousness with a divided, individualized, and therefore limited power and will to be master of the all-force. Only the all-will can be that, and the individual only, if at all, by becoming again one with the all-will, and therefore with the all-force. Otherwise, the individual life in the individual, otherwise the individual life in the individual form must be always subject to the three badges of its limitation: death, desire, and incapacity. Let's back up a sentence though. The notion that a soul could, through a deep communion, through arising into oneness with the all-will and the all-force, through this ascent of knowledge, could participate in that expression of a cosmic will, could itself be the individuating point upon earth. But this requires the supramentalization of the being. And since he is here speaking about the embodied life upon earth, it seems to suggest that no one can claim to represent that who is not living in it, body, life, and mind, all expressive of the supramental all-will. Accept no substitutes. Death is imposed on the individual life, both by the conditions of its own existence and by its relations to the all-force which manifests itself in the universe. So the individual life has two things which insist that it come to a termination point. The terms of how it has been formed, constituted with the beginning, a continuation, necessarily an end, and with its relationship to all that exists around it. So there's a universal context and an individual context, and both feed to the same thing. Until both are satisfied, there can be nothing that escapes the eventuality of this disintegration that we call death. So first he's describing here a context which is a kind of utility of death. Why is death here? What can we use it for? What is the lesson? And he continues, for the individual life is a particular play of energy specialized to constitute, maintain, energize, and finally to dissolve when its utility is over, one of myriad forms which all serve, each in its own place, time, and scope, the whole play of the universe. So this is a note within an orchestration. The energy of life in the body has to support the attack of the energies external to it in the universe. It has to draw them in and feed upon them, and is itself being constantly devoured by them. All matter, according to the Upanishad, is food. And this is the formula of the material world, that the eater eating is himself eaten. The life organized in the body is constantly exposed to the possibility of being broken up by the attack of the life external to it, or its devouring capacity being insufficient or not properly served, or there being no right balance between the capacity of devouring and the capacity or necessity of providing food for the life outside. It is unable to protect itself and is devoured, or is unable to renew itself and therefore wasted away or broken. It has to go through the process of death for a new construction or renewal. So here we have to pause. The eater eating is himself eaten. This is basically a translation of the Taittiriya Upanishad. You'll find it at 2.1. You'll also find it suggested and in part represented in the Maitreya Upanishad. You'll also find something very like this at Taittiriya Upanishad 3.7 and at Taittiriya Upanishad 3.10.6. In case, I know some of you like to find these Upanishadic references and citations and go back and see them. They're wonderful. By the way, this translation, the eater eating is himself eaten, was written in February for this publication in March of 1916. A few months from that point, Sri Aurobindo began a long series of essays called Essays on the Gita. He had not done that up until then. And then in the chapter on Kurukshetra, takes this phrase again and describes it as the eater eating is eaten. That would be in December of 1916. And if you will permit me a little aside, I'd like to read to you this verse from the Taittiriya Upanishad. He who knows this, on departing from this world, proceeding on to that self which consists of food, proceeding on to that self which consists of breath, life, proceeding on to that self which consists of mind, proceeding on to that self which consists of supermind, proceeding on to that self which consists of bliss, goes up and down these worlds, eating what he desires, assuming what form he desires. He sits singing this chant, Saman. Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I am food. I am food. I am food. I am a food eater. I am a food eater. I am a food eater. I am a fame maker. I am a fame maker. I am a fame maker. I am the firstborn of the world order. Rita, the real idea. Earlier than the gods, in the navel of immortality. Who gives me away? He indeed has aided me. I, who am food, eat the eater of food. I have overcome the whole world. He who knows this has a brilliantly shining light. Such is the Upanishad. Thank you for permitting that. So the final point, life finding an insufficient arrangement within a particular life form withdraws its force and permits the disintegration of the form so that it can reconstitute itself, renew itself in yet another form. The implication being that life, being immortal, cannot die. It can only withdraw from the material form. It can never itself experience death. Hunger is death. It is the absence of the mastery of life in matter that gives the utility of death its current reign. Another paragraph, please. Not only so, but again in the language of the Upanishad, the life force is the food of the body, and the body the food of the life force. That's the same Upanishad, 3.7. In other words, the life energy in us both supplies the material by which the form is built up and constantly maintained and renewed, and is at the same time constantly using up the substantial form of itself, that form of substance, which it thus creates and keeps in existence. If the balance between these two operations is imperfect or is disturbed, or if the ordered play of the different currents of life force is thrown out of gear, then disease and decay intervene and commence the process of disintegration. And the very struggle for conscious mastery and even the growth of mind make the maintenance of the life more difficult. So this suggests that the growing power of consciousness in us demands more and more from the living form. Can it give enough? Can we get enough life power into the form that it can sustain this greatening consciousness? Manifesting the mind, a big challenge for the body, for the living body. Manifesting a supramental consciousness, an immense, almost immarginate challenge. For there is an increasing demand of the life energy on the form, a demand which is in excess of the original system of supply and disturbs the original balance of supply and demand. And before a new balance can be established, many disorders are introduced inimical to the harmony and to the length of maintenance of the life. In addition, the attempt at mastery creates always a corresponding reaction in the environment which is full of forces that also desire fulfillment and are therefore intolerant of, revolt against, and attack the existence which seeks to master them. So good reasons there are why we find it difficult in evolving a greater consciousness to achieve easily or readily our goal, even if the aspiration is intense. We have to be able to bring in orders of energy which are not natural to the system, which are unusual. We have to disrupt the normal system of supply and demand. We have then also to maintain harmony, or at least self-protection, against an environment which may become hostile to us and no longer comport its action towards our eventual good. All the world wants that life energy. So even if you were able to undertake a tapasya, which no longer drew on life coming through material forms into the being, if you could draw on universal life energy, prana, directly, it might not be enough to sustain the body, because all other things want to tap into that life energy. And can the body be receptive to it? It's an unusual ask. So, then he writes, there too a balance is disturbed. A more intense struggle is generated. However strong the mastering life, unless either it is unlimited or else succeeds in establishing a new harmony with its environment, it cannot always resist and triumph, but must one day be overcome and disintegrated. So the utility of laying down the body to permit the life to move on, have another inning, another experiment taken up. But that disintegration of that substantial form does not end life, and it does not extinguish the individual, and we'll be coming to that. So this is where we'll put our bookmarks for this week. I think we have come a good distance. This is a somewhat shorter chapter than the last couple that we've looked at, so probably we can finish the chapter Death, Desire, and Incapacity next week. And if you'd like, there is a passage from Savitri I can read tonight. There have been a number of departures of dear friends, colleagues, fellow aspirants, people near and dear to us for many reasons, all of them ultimately spiritual. And I thought I would read, since we're touching upon the idea of death, a section from Savitri. This is in Book 2, the Book of the Traveler of the Worlds, on the world soul, Canto 14. Immersed in voiceless internatal trance, the beings that once wore forms on earth sat there in shining chambers of spiritual sleep. Past were the pillar posts of birth and death. Past was their little scene of symbol deeds. Past were the heavens and hells of their long road. They had returned into the world's deep soul. All now was gathered into pregnant rest. Person and nature suffered a slumber change. In trance they gathered back their bygone selves. In a background memories foreseeing muse, prophetic of new personality, arranged the map of their coming destiny's course. Heirs of their past, their future's discoverers, electors of their own self-chosen lot, they waited for the adventure of new life. A person persistent through the lapse of worlds, although the same forever in many shapes, by the outward mind unrecognizable, assuming names unknown in unknown climes, imprints through time upon the earth's worn page a growing figure of its secret self, and learns by experience what the spirit knew, till it can see its truth alive and God. Once more they must face the problem game of birth, the soul's experiment of joy and grief, and thought and impulse lighting the blind act, and venture on the roads of circumstance, through inner movements and external scenes, traveling to self across the forms of things. Into creation's center he had come. The spirit, wandering from state to state, finds here the silence of its starting point, in the formless force and the still fixity and brooding passion of the world of soul. All that is made and once again unmade, the calm, persistent vision of the One inevitably remakes. It lives anew. Forces and lives and beings and ideas are taken into the stillness for a while. There, they remold their purpose and their drift, recast their nature, and reform their shape. Ever they change, and changing, ever grow, and passing through a fruitful stage of death, and after long reconstituting sleep, resume their place in the process of the gods, until their work in cosmic time is done. And so it is for all of us. Until next week, namaste. Jai Ma.